Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Corina Sabique. I am located here in Rochester, Minnesota, and I'm here hosting Indigenous Health Topics with my colleague, Trudy Jackson, down in Arizona. And I'm going to go ahead and start us off today by going over a few housekeeping items. So as always, we will have some time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. Please add any of your questions to the Zoom Q&A function. There's a little area at the bottom of your screen where you'd be able to add your questions. It just helps us to keep track of all the questions that are being asked. And also, it's always good to know where everyone is logging in from, because we know all of Indian country is spread out throughout the country. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to add your tribal affiliation, your organization, the role, or where you are located. All right, and today our guest speaker is Dr. Craig Howe. He is the founder and director of the Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies. His topic today that he will be focusing on is advancing sovereignty through arts and education. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here and let Dr. Howe introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Craig Howe. As you said, I'm the director and founder of the Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies. I'm here at the center of the universe in Pine Ridge Reservation. And yeah, our organization was founded in 2004, December 21, 2004. So we're just coming up to our 21st anniversary next month. And I'm a citizen of the Oglala Sioux tribe and grew up here in the reservation, went to grade school and high school and in Martin, South Dakota, and then went to college at University of Nebraska for my bachelor's degree in architecture and master's degree, and then to the University of Michigan for my PhD in architecture and anthropology. So yeah, happy to be here this morning. Or morning here in Pine Ridge time. I don't know about the other time zones.
All right, you can go ahead and share your screen, Dr. Howe. I'll let you know what I'm seeing on my end.
Okay.
All right, you see your PowerPoint looks good.
Everything's good to go?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I seen John say Hihani Wash Day. So excellent, John. Just a shout out to John and Guthrie and Karina and also Trudy now. Sorry, I didn't have your name on here. And for facilitating my presentation this morning. And as I just mentioned, the Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies is our organization, and the acronym is CAIRNS. That's it, CAIRNS or CAIRNS. We pronounce it CAIRNS. CAIRNS is the acronym, Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies. And I just want to start off by saying what we call our 4 Rs. This is what guides what we do, or is the foundation for what we do. And I know a lot of people hear about the 3 Rs, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but spelling obviously isn't one of those, but all 4 of our Rs start with the letter R: rigor, reliability, respect, and relevance. And rigor is this setting of high, I just got to get this out of the way. Rigor is the setting of high standards and then assisting people in achieving them. It is understanding that the study of American Indian issues is an academic undertaking and is worthy of scholarly methods and critiques. Studying American Indian histories and cultures is not simplistic, nor is it childish. Such approaches are demeaning and denigrating. Rigor is the opposite of anti-intellectualism. And I think this is one thing that we have to work against a lot is this idea that, and maybe not in this audience particularly, but in general, this idea that we don't have to have high intellectual content when we're dealing with American Indians or let's say activities that schools or organizations bring in. It's rare that someone's coming in to talk about really important and intellectual activities rather than the default usually is something dealing with children. So there's this inherent anti-intellectualism when it comes to American Indians. The second R is this idea of reliability. And now I can't get to the next slide again. Can you help me out, Karina?
Let's see. So I know we tested this out earlier. You want to quickly stop sharing and then reshare again? Sorry, everyone. Just some technical difficulties. It always happens when we have these big events happening. We will get it figured out.
You just have to stop this. Okay. And then. All right. Are we back on seeing that slide?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So if I go here. All right. Okay, cool. Thanks, Karina. The second R is reliability, and this means that something can be trusted. It's based on evidence and research and is consistently of high quality. Reliable work is based on strategies that can be replicated and that draw on the best of educational and scholarly practices. It welcomes and encourages critical discussion, and it's the opposite of untested personal opinion. And this is one thing we try hard to do is I'll give my personal opinion this morning at times, but when it's information, try to use reliable information based on evidence and facts rather than just my personal opinion or what I heard from, relatives, grandpas or uncles or aunts and so forth, right? So that's this idea of reliability. The third R is respect, and this is the approach that all initiatives dealing with American Indians should be contemplative toward traditional tribal beliefs and traditions, and that these are based on thousands of years of experience here in what is now North America. Respectful work should do no harm to these traditions, nor should it treat them as quaint and simplistic vestiges of the past. So respect is the opposite of scorn. And then the fourth R is relevance, and this means that work and resources are useful to American Indians and Indian communities today and into the future. And I think this is one of the key things, right? Is this idea of what's useful to these communities. Relevance means that the work and resources recognize, support, and promote tribal sovereignty. It means that studying American Indian histories and cultures resonates with learners and helps them develop skills and knowledge that will assist them throughout their lives. Relevance is the opposite of outdated or irrelevance. So these are the four R's that I hope will be evident in what I'm going to do and show and share today. And when we have an idea like that, one way is like, how do you implement that? What's evidence that you can implement that? And so in response to a 2007 law in South Dakota, and you can see we developed an assessment. And the law in 2007 was called the Indian Education Act, and it says that it was in part to, quote, support initiatives in order that South Dakota's students and public school instructional staff become aware of and gain an appreciation of South Dakota's unique American Indian culture. And it also talked about developing course content and curriculum and coursework in South Dakota American Indian history and culture. But how do we assess if that's being done? And so what we developed was what you can see here is the cover page of the Oceti Sakowin assessment. Now, Oceti Sakowin is the Lakotan word for what the general population used to call Sioux, S-I-O-U-X, Sioux. So the Sioux people, their names for the name for themselves is this Oceti Sakowin, the Seven Council Fires, and we call that a confederacy, the Oceti Sakowin Confederacy, and it has three divisions: Dakotan, Nakotan, and Lakotan. But this assessment then is graded out at eighth grade knowledge, and we treat it like a GRE or an MCAT or an SAT. It's one of these things that we give to people, and we don't tell them ahead of time. We give it to them, and we've administered this assessment about 6,000 times now. And based on the results of that, what we know is that most of us don't know very much when it comes to American Indian history and culture, or in this case, Oceti Sakowin history and culture. The average score is 16% out of 100. And that's consistent. We can give this assessment to middle school students in Sioux Falls school districts or in reservation school districts. They'll score the same thing. We can give it to faculty members at universities all across the United States. They'll score the same thing. We can give it to elders. It just doesn't matter who takes this assessment. They're going to score plus or minus 3% from 16. So between 13 and 19% will get at least one standard deviation of all these assessments. And so that illustrates to us two things. First is that this knowledge is not genetic. And a lot of times this is what those of us who are American Indian, people just assume we have all this knowledge. And sometimes we give the impression that we do. But this assessment lets us know that it doesn't matter whether you're American Indian or non-Indian, you're going to score the same on this assessment. So uh, this allowed us or facilitated this idea that we're going to focus on this idea of education so that we can build our nations as informed citizens. This is our website, and our mission is actually how the website is organized. And you can see the second paragraph there is that we're committed to advancing knowledge and understanding of American Indian communities and issues important to them. And so in this case, we have the topic I was given was, this forum is for Indigenous health topics, and I'm going to argue a little different, I think, or present something a little different. Rather than the individual, the health of us as individuals, I want to make an argument for the health of our nations. And that this takes some really different type of thinking. So it's just as important, but it's going to be focusing on this idea of communities or nations, tribes, rather than on individuals. And we're going to do this then through sovereignty, because this is the key. And sovereignty, of tribal sovereignty, American Indian sovereignty, this is going to, I think almost everyone will acknowledge that this goes back to 3 Supreme Court decisions. This called the Marshall Trilogy, named after the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Back in I think he was the Chief Justice from around 1800 to, I don't know if it's 1835 or sometime around there. I think his first name was John, his last name was Marshall. The first of these key Supreme Court decisions was Johnson v. McIntosh in 1823. And this is when the Supreme Court decided that American Indians have occupancy rights. Now, this is kind of like a deer or a elk or a buffalo. They have occupancy rights. They can live on this land, but they don't own it. That's basically what the Supreme Court was saying about American Indians and Indian tribes is they have occupancy rights to this land, but they don't own it. And if they want to alienate that land, they can only do it to us, the federal government, the United States of America. In other words, they can't sell their lands to Americans or to states, United States. I mean, individual states like Georgia or South Dakota or Arizona, they can't do that. They can only sell it to the federal government. So the market, it was limited to the federal government. The next of these Supreme Court decisions is Cherokee Nation v. Georgia, and this is in 1831. And that decision is where we get this idea that these tribes, which are always called nations in treaties, these are not like foreign nations. Because if they were foreign nations, then we, the federal government, would not have a jurisdictional authority over them. These tribes are domestic dependent nations. So they do fall under the federal judiciary power. And then the third of these three Supreme Court decisions is Worcester v. Georgia. And it has two really, really important aspects to it. The first is that tribes have original natural rights. And this is just so important. The rights of nations or tribes, the United States didn't give these nations these rights. These are inherent to the tribes. These tribes existed here before the United States was established. So you hear a lot of times people will say, well, we should just not let these tribes do X, Y, and Z. Well, it's not your, no one has that authority. These tribes have the rights and they've retained all their rights unless they have explicitly alienated those. And some tribes have, many tribes have given up some rights. But it's not a use it or lose it. As long as you haven't, you meaning a tribe, as long as a tribe has not alienated any rights, they retain all those rights. The second aspect of this Supreme Court decision was that state laws have no force in Indian country. And this is just really, really key. And we'll come back to that in a little bit here. So basic thing on that last Worcester v. Georgia, these tribes have natural rights, inherent rights, and they're at a status higher than states. All right. It's these tribes that differentiate us. I don't know how to say that. Tribes are nations. They are not, by the Supreme Court decision, tribes are not cultural groups, racial groups, ethnic groups, or minority groups. Though the United States will never sign treaties with any of those four types of groups. Those type of groups don't have citizens, they have members. Those types of groups have no federal law specifically oriented towards those. And this is what's really key when we're thinking about nations being healthy, is that they're healthy as nations, these political entities, not as cultural groups, racial groups, ethnic groups, or minority groups. So these sovereign nations have two aspects to them that, again, if we're going to really think critically, we need to keep these in mind. So these two aspects are a political aspect, or we call these philosophies, maybe. So we have a political philosophy and a spiritual philosophy. These are inherent, inseparable for any tribal nation. There's another philosophy, and we'll look at it here, but then we're going to set it aside. And this is a biological philosophy. So in addition to this political and spiritual, we have this biological one. And each of these philosophies have a source of sovereignty and a land base. And I think that's the basics of a nation is you have a source of sovereignty. How are you recognized as being independent? And a land base that you can govern over. So on the land base, as the source of sovereignty for the political aspect or political philosophy of tribes are treaties and treaty substitutes. For the spiritual source of sovereignty, that's these original instructions that tribes received from the spirits long time ago. And then for these for this biological uh, um, philosophy, the source of sovereignty is ancestry, right? So someone will say, I'm Indian and therefore I'm sovereign, or I'm American Indian and I'm sovereign. So we see these different sources of sovereignty for these different philosophies dealing with this idea of tribal sovereignty. Now, for the land bases of the political philosophy, those are reservations or other trust lands or lands held in trust for tribes by the federal government. For the spiritual philosophy, their land bases are the homelands, and these might be far from contemporary uh, reservations of their reservations. It might be a land base far away, and these might be where the people emerged or came down onto this earth. And so these describe the homelands, and those are often in early narratives. They'll give the extent of their homelands. Almost always the homelands are far broader than these contemporary reservations. And with the biological philosophy, their land base that fits their philosophy is the Western Hemisphere. And this Western Hemisphere is seen as opposite to the European hemisphere. So any land in the Western Hemisphere is under their land base. Now, we don't think that biological philosophy fits, and I'll make the argument here for why. So I'm just going to set that aside, and we're just going to focus on this political and spiritual philosophies that are tied to nations. And these nations, if they're being recognized, if they don't have recognition, they're unrecognized. That's pretty true. They can be, if they are recognized, there's two levels, and there are hierarchical. A state can recognize a tribe, or the federal government can recognize a tribe. And the federal recognition, of course, is the gold standard. If all tribes would aspire to have a federal recognition, to be a federally recognized American Indian tribe. There's 574 of those today. If they have this federal recognition, then most of the times there's these treaties, a treaty or multiple treaties between the federal government and each nation. There will also be federal Indian laws that apply to these tribes and to their citizens. There's going to be lands that the federal government holds in trust for these governments and their citizens. And again, back to that Worcester case, the status of these nations, these federal recognized tribes, is government to government with the U.S. government, not with their state government. So that's the same as like France or Japan or wherever. There's nation to nation with the federal government, not with the state governments. Now, like with the gaming NAGPRA, not NAGPRA, sorry, the Gaming Act, I can't think of the acronym right now, but that requires that tribes negotiate or negotiate compacts with state governments, and that's a loss of some level of tribal sovereignty, but that's what the federal law requires. So sometimes state tribes do have to negotiate, and of course, absolutely do work with state governments. But that doesn't mean these state governments have jurisdiction in tribal lands. The contrary, the state governments do not. The positives of seeing these tribal nations as having this political and spiritual philosophies or dimensions is that it reinforces this connection between the old world and the new world. And by this, I mean like this map. So this is the American Indian old world. The Europeans, they have an old world and a new world. And just to be fair, if the Europeans have an old world and a new world, then what would an American Indian old world look like? And this is what we think it would look like, and maybe this will help you see it. No one American Indian knew all of this land base. No one European knew all of that European old world. Collectively, Europeans knew their old world. Collectively, American Indians knew their old world. And that's been for over 12,000 years. And that's based off the radiocarbon dating of a skeleton of a little boy in a cave in Montana. So for 12, and I'm sure that kid had parents and grandparents and great grandparents and so forth, but that kid was about 12,500 years old. So we know American Indians have been here that long. And so what's the American Indian New World look like? This is the lands that are held in trust for American Indian tribes here in the United States and in Canada. Those are reservation lands in the US. In Canada, they're called reserves. And the root of that word is so important, reserve. These lands were not given to tribes or to tribal nations. These lands were reserved by these political entities, these nations, when they gave all the rest of their lands to the United States or to Canada. They retained for themselves, reserved for themselves, these smaller land bases. So again, a lot of people think that these reservation lands are gifts of the federal government to tribes. The opposite is more close to the truth. Um, when we see and think about nations as these political entities and these spiritual entities, then we can develop applications. And specifically, I'm thinking of art right now, but that within tribal lands. And what we're trying to do is develop these nations into healthy nations. And so, what can we do that's going to be useful in these tribal lands? Again, this approach recognizes tribal sovereignty, and indigenous people do not have any legal rights in this country. That there's no treaties with indigenous people. These treaties are with tribal nations. And so this idea of tribal sovereignty, which goes back to those Marshall Trilogy Supreme Court decisions, that's that's what we have to work within if we want to have a healthy nation healthy nations within the United States. And then the last is that this approach, especially with that spiritual aspect, this is what this respects these traditional tribal beliefs. So this is the way we think to develop these healthy tribes, is to reinforce this concept of sovereignty. And in particular, what we want to do is look at it through arts and education for a little bit here. Uh, so just to get a peek behind the curtain of how we do this, we have our organization has a Lakota Educational Arts Project. It's LEAP is the acronym. And we've done 7 exhibits since 2014. 2015 was our first exhibit. And these are in the sequence from the first one in 2015 at the bottom of that on the left side of your screen there of the page. Screenshot is Lakota Emergence, and the latest one we did was just a couple years ago called Navigating Narratives. These are the 6 exhibits from left to right, first to last. And what you can see is on the concepts based on those assessments. Remember that Oceti Shakwein assessment? People don't know these traditional narratives. So the first 3 exhibits we did were about these traditional narratives. And so Lakota Emergence, about the emergence of the ancestors of Lakotans onto this earth. The Great Race was this narrative about all these animals in the Lakotan universe that had an epic race, and the result of that race was the Black Hills that we know today, the Black Hills of South Dakota. the third of these narratives is about a Lakotan woman named Tapun Shanwi who married a star. And we see then this relationship between Lakotans and the stars. And then fourth and fifth exhibits were about historical events. Dockaway is about Wounded Knee, the 1890 Wounded Knee Massacre. And the Articles of a Treaty is about the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. And then sixth exhibit was called The Gift, and that's about the gift of the sacred pipe. And then seventh exhibit was Navigating Narratives, and that was about the Core Discovery expedition coming up the river and when it was in Teton territory for 7 days in 1804. So anyway, this is the exhibits that we've done, and this is the core of our LEAP initiative, this Lakota Educational Arts Project. The way we typically do this, and this was how we developed this on that very first exhibit, and it's just been continued and modified through these, is we take this traditional narrative, in this case, how the Lakotans came upon the world. It's the only published account of this. It's 1,251 words. And then we divide it into passages. At that time, we called them vignettes. But so we take that long narrative and organize it into passages. They don't have to be all equal. In this case, some of those passages were like 2 paragraphs, and the very last passage was 1 sentence. So it's just kind of conceptually how we organize that. Then we ask a Lakotan artist. In this case, this is Richard Red Owl, lives over near Kyle, Oglala Sioux Tribe citizen, and he had passage 14. And you can see him in his house, his studio, working on his painting there. And this is on the left here. You can see that painting. And the passage he had was, in the morning, the people did not know where to go. They were hungry and thirsty. Then the old man and the old woman appeared and gave them food and drink. Now, you can see Richard, it's an amazing piece Richard has done. In the middle, center towards the bottom, that dark black almost, that's the depiction of this wind cave. And then you can see some silhouettes of people coming out of that cave. These 7 families. And in the narrative, it says these 7 families came out of the cave. And they knew it was a one-way journey, that they would never be able to go back. So it took a lot of courage to do that. And they came up, and then even up at the in the center of it, right in the center, is the red sun rising. And Richard said that's the birth of the Red Nation, the Lakota Nation is right there. And it's when these, actually, they would be the ancestors of Lakotans. These are the Pate people, the Pateans. But they're coming up in these families, and the man on the left is giving them water, and the woman on the right is giving them food. But anyway, that's the process here. We take a narrative, organize it into passages, invite different Lakotan artists for each of the passages, and we end up with an artwork tied to that narrative. Then, going forward from that first exhibit, then we started to also incorporate Lakotan poets and Lakotan musicians. And this is a case of the third exhibit, Tapun Shanwi, and this is the musician is Stephen Yellowhawk, and he used the exhibit title also as the title of his song, and you just get a sense here. We won't play all the way through, but you can hear. What our challenge was how do you exhibit a song? And so these are called waveforms. And in that waveform, you can see we standardize the length, and then so you can see the length of the song, and then you can see the amplitude or the loudness of the song vertical. And you can see that first song by Stephen has those 4 segments, and that's, if you did this with traditional songs, that's what you're going to see. 4 lifts, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the closing, which often I'll have these 4. But you look at this next song here by who is it? Oh, that's Sissy Goodhouse. So it's a beautiful singing song. Very few instruments or none, and it's just uniform all the way. And then you see a song like this. This is by I can't shoot, I can't think of his first name. Branks Plenty. And then the last one I want to show is these are all for that Tapun Shanwin exhibit. And this is how we'd have these panels like on music stands. In this case, with headphones, you could listen to the songs. We've experimented with these different, but this song is by Uncommon Knowledge. And what I just love about this is that you have this representation of the poems and the artworks and the music, that there's no one way to be a Lakotan, no one way to do Lakotan art or painting or music or poetry. And when these guys came into the exhibit for the opening, they don't look like the typical art museum clientele. They come in and we had to pass out. They knew there was going to be an issue with understanding the lyrics, so they passed out lyrics to the audience so that they could understand when they finally got to the lyrics of the song. Because this is heavy metal, and for most of us who can't really hear it, when they start singing, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. So they see themselves as outsiders, as these heavy metal musicians, and so those are part of our citizenry in our tribal nation, that we have this diversity. And so it's just so important from our philosophy that we have this diversity in the artworks and in those artworks, meaning the creative works of musicians, painters, sculptors, and poets. And here's in that same exhibit, here's a poem by Patrick LeBeau, a citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe.
Relative placement. Placed will he, creed to venerable dirt-born she, till grown strong by her nourishing soups, by hunters of animal meat, and nearby givers of plant meat. Solicious to songs of villager groups, scion of up-down places, sky and dirt, dirt and sky, cloud nation.
So you can see, in this case, Patrick took this idea of this boy. The narrative says that this Tapun Shanwi married a star, and they went to live up in the star world. And one day when her husband was out traveling, she was told not to, but she seen a plant that looked like a timpsala, reminded her of home, and so she decided to dig it up. And when she did, she could see through the sky all the way down to her relatives. And she wanted to go, and she was pregnant really pregnant towards the end of her term with their baby. And so anyway, she tried to go down, she braided all things together to go down through that hole and come down to her relatives. And the narrative says it wasn't long enough, that rope. And so she fell, and that fall killed her. But miraculously, that her baby was born, and these Lakotan boys came and found them, realized and confirmed she was dead, but that this baby was alive, and they took him back to the village. And the people there decided to give that baby to a older woman to raise, and she named him Wichachbehinkbaya, fallen star. So when her Tapun Shanwin's husband came back and he couldn't find her, he seen that hole and he looked through and he seen that she was dead on the earth. The narrative says he walked a little ways and sat down and he hasn't moved. And so he is the North Star. And so these how these narratives link these things together. And that boy, a fallen star, was like this orphan. And that's how Uncommon Knowledge, the band, made that analog. And Patrick, in his poem, looked at it through the Indian Child Welfare Act, where he and his wife actually have done that, adopted a relative, right? And so that's why he uses that some specific terms like placement. That's this term that has standing in that law. So these long ago narratives can have bearings on contemporary personal situations and lives of individual citizens. Now, you can go on our website and see not those first three exhibits. I don't have those up yet, but from Dockaway forward, we have the artworks up on the exhibit. And also for Dockaway, the one about the 1890 massacre, you can also see like on the left side of this slide, you can see you can look at the creatives. The stars here are where the creatives were from for that exhibit, all Lakotans. And then we organize them by nation. So these are the creatives and you can see the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Wood Mountain First Nation, and United States of America. One of the bands is led by a tribal citizen, but there's also two non-tribal citizens. So their nationality, their nations is the United States of America. So we try to keep that analog that these tribal nations are equivalent to the United States of America. And then on the educational aspect, you can see the curriculum. If you click on curriculum, you come to this page, and these were the educators that then develop this curriculum linked to the exhibit. And you can, if you click on any of these, you can get lesson plans. And these are all free, and they're available for free on the CAIRNS website. So just in closing then, I guess, I really like this statement by Luther Standing Bear. Becoming possessed of a fitting philosophy and art, it was by them that native man perpetuated his identity, stamped it into the history and soul of this country, made land and man one. And so the way I see that is identity is philosophy and art, is what he's saying. You have philosophy and you have art. That combination gives us our identity. That philosophy is what I think is sovereignty. And to have sovereignty, we have to have a source of that sovereignty and a land base. So this is the way we see the work we're doing, is that this idea of tribal sovereignty has a source and it has a land base. And it's through the arts that in architecture especially, that we can embody that identity as the Oglala Sioux tribe, or as Lakotans, or as whatever other tribe you want to think of. The idea being, how do we do an airport, a Lakotan airport? How do we do Ojibwe hospital? And it's got to be deeper than just the surface color or shapes. But anyway, that's then what I wanted to share, and I'm happy to answer any questions or visit about any of this now. So thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
All right, let me just, thank you, Dr. Howe. That was a really great presentation. I think it's really awesome to be able to tell stories. Oh, I'm still off video. Tell stories through art. Like you said, there's no one way that artists tell a story. Like you shared, like the way of poetry through paintings or drawings, music, and all of our nations, we have wonderful talented artists, and it's really great to be able to incorporate their work when it comes to the work that you do. So thank you for sharing. That was really, really amazing to see. I did post the link to the project's website in the chat. there for anyone who would like to see that. And I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of skim our chat here. There's just a lot of thank yous, miigwech, great talk, wonderful presentation, very informative. The concept of philosophy and art is new, so thanks for bringing this forward. Very inspirational. And then it looks like we may have a question in the chat as well that I'm gonna go ahead and let Trudy bring up for us.
Hi. I think the only thing that I see on there really is just a lot of thank yous and for the information that was shared. And I actually put a question in the chat where what is the appropriate term to reference? Is it Native American, American Indian, or in the indigenous? Because oftentimes it's like in the city we get um, oftentimes thrown off, but but with the federal government they reference us as American Indians. And then one of the things I learned from the late Dr. James Wrightington was he said was a lot of natives will say natives among each other, but when you're in a setting American Indian and on a global is indigenous. That was how I interpret it. But then also I've heard other individuals say you don't use American in Indian, we're just Indians. But then when you look at individuals that are from India that are Indians, so I'm just curious what your input is on that.
So the way we do it, and you can probably tell also by our name of our organization, is American Indian is our preference. Synonymous with American Indian is Native American. Those are interchangeable and completely synonymous. And we can look at federal Indian law, American Indian Religious Freedom Act, or the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Those are synonymous, and it gives us options to use those two when we're dealing with tribes. But those of us, and this is where we really think we have to, again, this isn't with health of nations, but it's more about us as individuals. But we need these different terms for individuals. So are you an Indian, or are you a Wanabe, or are you a citizen? We need to be able to differentiate. And it's good. I have Irish ancestry. I'm not ancestry. I also have French and English, but I don't call myself any of those. I'm not a citizen of those nations. And so with me, I'm a citizen of the Oglala Sioux tribe, and I'm a citizen of the United States of America. So I have dual citizenship. And this is on that personal side. On the tribal side, I just think it's critical that we get the word tribe in there. Whatever we're saying, indigenous peoples have no rights in this country by law. There are no rights for indigenous people. There are no rights for indigenous nations in this country. And we're in this country, and we are trying to do things that are useful in tribal communities today, tribal lands. So that word indigenous, we really push back against as much as we can. It's really great for academics and worldwide when it's trying to make relationships worldwide, but that falls into that biological philosophy that all of us who have some ancestor is here before the Europeans got here, we're all somehow together. And what we want is what's the system? And the only and we actually have 5, we call them individualism, Indianism, indigenism, nationalism, and tribalism. But only tribalism doesn't require the presence of non-Indians. And I think this is really important if we're trying to conceptualize things. How can we think and do things that don't require the presence of non-Indians? And so I have a long way to say on the naming. Stick with, if we have to do something broad, Native Americans or American Indians, once we know Oglala Sioux tribe, Navajo Nation, or Dene Nation, depending on what language people want to go through, but there is an official recognized tribe. I mean, I look at our police cars of our tribe and it says Oglala Lakota Nation. That OLN doesn't exist to the federal government. What does exist is the Oglala Sioux tribe. If we want to change that, we can. Our tribe can have a referendum and we can vote and change our name. We can do that. Do it. If that's what we want, do it. We did vote about 10 years ago if Oglala Lakota Nation versus Oglala Sioux tribe, and those who voted, the majority was to stick with Oglala Sioux tribe. I think that's, in my mind, that was a incorrect decision, but that's the majority.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm looking at the chat. I don't see anything else.
We have a question in the Q&A there.
Oh, the Q&A right here. Okay, yes. It says, as Minnesota implements Indigenous education for all in K through 12, what recommendations do you have for us educators and Native community members to support and assess this work?
Yeah, that's really complicated. And I was part of the statewide process here in the state that we developed the Oceti Sakowin Essential Understandings, which was based off of what they did in Montana. So I think these are important opportunities, but it's going to take a lot and a lot and a lot of thinking. And we just don't do that. We collectively, we just don't put in that deep thinking of what's critical to teach. And for instance, like, I just think people should know the basics. Like, what's the names of how many reservations and tribes are there in your state? What are their names? What's their official names? And we have 9 tribes in South Dakota, and of that assessment we've given, that Oceti Sakowin assessment, over 6,000 times, no one's ever been able to name the 9 tribes and the 9 reservations and the 9 capitals. That's, when I was in 4th grade, I had to learn 50 states and 50 capitals, 100 data points. No one has been able to do 27 data points dealing with American Indians here. So I think, don't try to worry about esoteric knowledge. Focus on the basics that are useful for people and that they can excel at.
Great, thank you, Dr. Howe, for answering those questions. I think it's really important what you brought up, so thank you again. Just a lot of thank yous in the chat, and I did post, like I said, the website for Native CAIRNS for anyone who would like to check that out. I also did post, so for any of our Indigenous Health Topics webinars, we do record them, and we have a YouTube playlist. So I posted that link in the chat as well for any of you. So this session today was recorded and will be posted hopefully in the next week. And for all those that are still on, if you could also take our quick survey, that'd be really helpful for us to help us improve on our webinar sessions, but also if you are interested in any future topics, please feel free to add your suggestions there as well. And just want to really thank you again, Dr. Howe, for joining us today. And I just want to leave you with some last thoughts or any recommendations.
Just big thanks to everyone that's I think I mentioned to you, Karina, I can't multitask, so I don't know what all is going on in the once in a while I see some things floating up on the screen, but it's all kind of new to me, but I really appreciate people being here and Karina and Trudy, thank you so much for your participation here this morning. I'm saying morning here now, it's almost noon, but big thanks to Mayo for sponsoring this as well. Really appreciate it.
All right. And
Thank you.
Trudy, anything you want to add?
No, it's just a great refresher course over in AIS. Um, I was very glad that you touched on the Marshall trilogy because that was something that was really ingrained in us over as AIS students. So it was good to have you include that. So just encourage the attendees to further explore the Marshall trilogy because those are very important cases. So just want to add that.
Mhm. All right. Well, I'm going to let everyone go today. Happy Friday, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you again. We will see you all.
See you.